All right, there we go. Okay, welcome everybody to the Committee on Rulemaking first meeting on the draft recommendation for the project called Interagency Communication and Rulemaking. My name is Adam Klein. I'm the staff counsel on the project. I'm joined by our committee chair, Jen Dickey, and also our consultant on the report in this project, Christopher Kerrigan. What I'll do first is I'll call the rolls, then I'll kick it over to Jeremy Grayboyce, our research director, for a quick opener, and then we'll kick it to Jen to open the meeting and provide a bit of an overview before sending it back to Chris to talk about the research for the project. So first, I will call two rolls. The first roll will be the names of committee members and alternates of committee members. The second roll will be names of ACUS members who are not members of the rulemaking committee and their alternates. After each name is called, the person should say here so we can make sure that your mics are working. So yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. So our first roll is going to be committee members for the rulemaking committee. So here we have Daniel Amadeu.
Yes. Can you hear me? Yeah.
I can hear you just fine, Daniel. Okay, we have Tyler Badgley.
I'm here. And if I have to drop, can Herminio Castro be my alternate?
You got it. Thank you, Tyler.
Thank you.
Laura Barheit.
Present.
I heard you there. Let's see here. How about Brigham Bowen? Not yet, so we'll circle back. Emily Brimmer.
Here.
Good to see you, Emily. Let's see here. Amy Brown. Not yet. Amy Bunk.
I'm here. I'll have to drop off for about 30 minutes at 2, but I'll be back after that.
No worries at all. Let's see here. How about Seth Davis? Did I hear you, Seth? Not yet. Okie doke. Jen Dickey, our committee chair, I saw, and her microphone worked. Perfect. Carolyn Dubé.
Present.
Hello. All right. So we're going to also do Bill Funk. Not yet. Aram Gavor. Don't see him. Okay, Thomas Johnson Jr.
I'm here, Adam.
I hear you loud and clear. Okay. Here. I also have Elizabeth McFadden. Don't hear you. We'll circle back. So we have Haley Webster, who's the designated alternate for Elena Ness.
Here.
Right.
Adam, this is Elena. I'm here too, but I'm gonna just listen, and Haley is gonna have it.
Perfect. All right. Ray Peeler. Not yet. David Pritzker.
I'm here.
Good to see you, David. Okie doke. Lon Smith.
I'm here.
I hear you loud and clear. Tony Verona.
I'm here.
Got Daniel Weiss. Daniel, not yet. Okay, we got Miriam Vincent.
I'm here.
Okie doke. All right, and we got David Zering.
I'm here.
Good to see you. Okay, so now we're going to call members of ACUS that are not members of the Committee on Rulemaking. Did I see Matt Weiner log on? Not yet. Nick Goldstein? Not yet. Jim Tozy? Not yet. We also have Anam Rashidi, who's the designated alternate for Helen Serasio, EPA.
Here.
Good to see you. And we have Elizabeth Cole, designated alternate for Dan Cohen.
I am here.
All right. And then let's also test and make sure we have a mic for Chris Kerrigan, our consultant for the project.
Here.
All right. right, so I'll kick it back over to Jeremy Greyvoice, our research director.
Awesome. Thanks, Adam. Great to see everybody today. I will be very brief so we can get to discussing this important recommendation. Just a few quick thanks to Professor Kerrigan for an outstanding report, Adam for shepherding the project through, and Jen for chairing the committee as well. So look forward to today's discussion. Thank you.
All right, I'll kick it back over to Jen there for the meeting opening.
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I look forward to working with you all on this recommendation. I'm just going to go over the standard meeting protocols. So please note that only ACUS members, which includes government members, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels, whether or not on the committee, and their designated alternates have full speaking privileges. To avoid background noise, though, I'd ask that you keep your microphone on mute and either use Zoom's hand raise feature or add a comment in the chat feature if you'd like to speak. I'll then call on you and you can unmute yourself. Please then remute yourself when you're done. I'd also ask that ACUS members and their designated alternates use the webcam to facilitate conversation. With respect to attendees other than ACUS members and alternates, participation requires the unanimous consent of the committee members. Time permitting, I'll consider calling on such attendees at appropriate points and will presume that committee members consent absent their raising an objection. If any such participant would like to speak, please so indicate in the chat feature or by using Zoom's hand raise feature and wait to speak until I call on you. You can then unmute yourself and please remute yourself when you are done speaking. For all participants, please use the chat feature only to indicate that you'd like to speak, or for committee members and their alternates to vote when asked. Please do not hold any sidebar discussions or put substantive comments in the chat feature. I know it's so hard, but try not to. Only members of the Rulemaking Committee, including government members and their designated alternates, public members, senior fellows, liaison representatives, and special counsels have a vote. Please do not vote unless you're a member of the committee. We have a list of committee members in case you're unsure. And I just apologize in advance. I'm currently on maternity leave, so I have my newborn with me as the youngest attendee of this committee meeting. Here she is. She's currently asleep. If she makes a big fuss, I'll treat her just like other non-committee members and will not call on her absent consent from the group. But I ask for your grace as we make our way through this meeting on that front. Now I'll kick it over to Chris Kerrigan for the presentation of his research.
Thanks, Jen. I appreciate it. So a little background. I'm Chris Kerrigan. I'm a faculty member at George Washington University at the Trachtenberg School of Public Policy and Public Administration. I also co-direct a center called the GW Regulatory Studies Center. I'm a social scientist. My training is in, my PhD is in public policy. So the report is perhaps written a little different than it would be if it were a legal scholar. Hopefully we would have similar ideas and recommendations and findings, but I apologize, I guess, for that piece of it. So as a little background, I think it's helpful. I previously did an ACUS report with Stuart Shapiro at Rutgers like 4 or 5 years ago, where we looked at early stage engagement with external stakeholders. So this project's obviously different in the sense that we're looking at how agencies engage with other agencies in their process of developing rules. But what was interesting, I thought, was that one key finding was very similar between the two, that the project design was similar in the sense that it was mixed methods, and we had kind of public review of public documents, and then we did interviews. And what was similar about it was the fact that although there wasn't a lot of disclosure in the public documents, that you would have one perception about the extent to which agencies engage with external stakeholders if you just read the public documents. It was quite different when we interviewed people and asked agency rule writers their level of engagement with external stakeholders. And the same is true in this particular project, with the design itself, again, is mixed methods. We looked at a series of internal agency handbooks around how they design their rules. They're publicly available, but they're designed mainly internally to guide rulemakers and how they develop a rule in the process. We also looked at the preambles of significant proposed rules for two administrations, the first Trump administration as well as the Biden administration, so a sample from each. And then we did a series of interviews, 21 interviews across a variety of different executive departments and independent agencies. And again, found very different things, which I'll kind of suggest in my kind of key takeaways. So, to be brief, I think there's really five primary takeaways from the project. The first one is that the way agencies primarily decide who to engage from other agencies in a rulemaking is determined by what they often refer to as shared equities, which is the idea that agencies have mission overlap, and they'll look for agencies when they're writing a rule that have overlapping missions, as well as agencies whose procedures, processes could be affected by the rule, and they tend to reach out to those agencies. This happens all the time, as far as the interview suggested, in the sense that's a quite prominent part of the rulemaking process, is embedded in the rulemaking process for the most part. So that was kind of insight one. The second one is that while rule writers take comments from other agencies throughout the process of developing the rule, all the way through to promulgation, the most valuable comments they receive are the ones they receive early, so before they even propose the rule. And I think this is largely because at that stage, the rule is really kind of in its early stages of development. And so the set of issues that are at play are quite wide. So the impact that another agency can have on that rulemaking is significantly greater than when you're moving down the line past the proposed rule, and it becomes much more difficult to kind of change course significantly. So that was kind of insight two. The third insight was that this process is largely informal. I mean, there are formal elements to it, which I'll talk about here in a second, and which I talk about in the report, but particularly this valuable early stage engagement is pretty informal. That the handbooks, in our review of the handbooks, if the average handbook was 25 pages or 30 pages long, we'd be lucky to find a paragraph that talked about interagency communication during the process. And so the process by which agency rule writers determine, for example, who to contact, when to contact, et cetera, is really through like word of mouth, as well as who to contact is through their development of their networks within their during their time and their period in government. So over time, as they collect experience, they have more interactions with a wider variety of different personnel at different agencies, and that's how they typically engage with those other agencies. They'll reach out to their networks. So that was kind of the third thing. The fourth thing was that in our preambles or review of preambles, and also through the interview process, we learned that it's very rare that agencies actually disclose the communication that they do with other agencies, particularly early stage communication in the preamble. And part of the reason is the protections afforded by FOIA, but I think there's also a broader reason, which is that agencies want to encourage frank, potentially more helpful feedback, which is easier to do in those sorts of situations. So it's rare to actually find the interagency communication that's happening quite robustly in the early stage and in an actual preamble, unless, for example, it's like a joint rulemaking or something like that. So that was really kind of the fourth insight. And the fifth insight was when we talked about, potentially formalizing the process more, agency personnel were somewhat resistant to that. And I would say that that is because they didn't think it was necessarily would be helpful. Their ability to kind of address issues quickly, flexibly, kind of work through difficult problems is made easier through the informal process that they follow. And that informal process actually works pretty well. So, there's certainly formal processes that encourage interagency communication. So, the most prominent being the OIRA interagency review process, but there's also obviously joint rulemaking. There's ability for agencies to comment on other agencies' rules, which they rarely actually do in practice. And there's other things. So there's statutory consultation requirements. Sometimes there's executive directives. There's MOUs between agencies. But those formal processes tend to complicate incentives in some cases. So to give two quick examples, agencies rarely voluntarily decide to engage in a joint rulemaking. And part of the reason is because of the disclosure, the differences in disclosure, and in encouraging kind of frank feedback and more helpful feedback that they normally don't do that. So they prefer to actually collect that feedback more informally. And a second example is the OIRA review process. Actually, incentivizes agencies to engage earlier with other agencies to get their feedback prior to that formal process, to make that formal process go more smoothly. So in some ways, the OIRA more formal process acts as a backstop to encouraging agencies to engage kind of widely with other agencies early in their process of developing a rule. I won't talk about the recommendations. The recommendations kind of fall out of these findings, and they're very similar to the recommendation that we're going to talk about, the ACUS recommendation. But the recommendation, I would say, by and large, are ultimately ways to improve what I think is a pretty effective and well-functioning process in which agencies, certainly try to work with their peers quite regularly to develop better rules. And so while it may not always be visible, this interagency communication is, a critical component actually of effective rulemaking, and one that's happening quite regularly long before that rule is made public, either as a proposed rule and ultimately finalized. That's basically the crux of the findings in, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes or maybe 10 minutes. I don't know how long that took. And I will pass it back over to Jen.
Great. So at this point, we'll move over to looking at the draft recommendation. The way I usually like to run things is to go directly toward, well, first to ask about any overarching comments people have, if there's anything that they want to discuss as a global matter about the recommendation. And if not, then proceed to the actual text of the recommendation, work through edits there, and then go back to the preamble, because I find that that has been more efficient in the committee meetings I've attended and chaired. So I would go ahead and start with that first item I noted, which is are there any overarching questions, comments, things that people want to discuss about this recommendation? Hearing and seeing none. Adam, do you want to go ahead and move to the text of the recommendation?
That sounds great. Just to check in, can everybody see this all right?
Yes.
Perfect.
We have now Emily Bremer.
Sorry, it took me a minute to find the raise hand feature. So I just have a question. So I noticed that the research was based on practices over the last 2 administrations. And so I guess and correct me if I'm wrong about that, but I guess I have sort of 2 questions. One is whether that is sort of representative. And then my second question is, given the upheaval, and I'm not in DC anymore, so I feel pretty removed from how things are going in the administration. But I guess one question I have is, to the extent that a lot of this is about sort of informal networks and institutional knowledge and practices that are sort of a product of the people who are there. I guess my question is, how much of that has been disrupted or is likely to continue? And, does the current upheaval present sort of a challenge or a caution or impose a limitation on ACUS's ability to provide advice that's going to be sort of heard and followed and useful to whoever remains?
Chris, I'll kick it over to you to respond.
Sure. So the one portion of the project, the review of the preambles of the proposed rules, was included a 6-month sample from the first Trump administration and the Biden administration. So in that way, yes, that's true. But when we asked in the interviews and the review of the handbooks, I mean, I think I can't remember exactly where I cut it off, but the handbooks themselves, I mean, we were looking at handbooks that were going all the way back to 1990 in some cases. So there was some more breadth there. And then the interviews, I asked, the rule writers to feel free to talk about their experiences, not just at their current agency or in the last, 6 months, but their experiences more broadly with interagency communication and rulemaking. And so from that perspective, I don't think it's really necessarily that the report only focuses on the last two administrations. I think it's a little bit broader, at least on those two components, the two of the three components. And I think, if I could weigh which component gave the most informative information, would certainly be the interviews. From that perspective, I would say, and I will also say that with respect to the disruption and that sort of thing, there was some conversation around that. I can't remember the detail around if it was really something that agency personnel were worried about, but they certainly, to the extent that you have a certain network that you're used to dealing with, and then all of a sudden, half those people are gone, it does create some issues with respect to trying to find the right person to get feedback. And there's other mechanisms that they use in terms of, asking around within their agency, moving to kind of like more higher level people within the agency to make contact for them. So there are other avenues that they use. I think the most expedient one is their networks, but certainly that has the potential of being somewhat disruptive for sure.
And Chris, when you were doing those interviews, were you primarily speaking with political appointees or longtime career civil servants?
Yeah, mainly long-time career civil servants. So mainly the people who were drafting the rules or reviewing them directly, not senior executives in the agencies for the most part. I mean, they did talk about their experiences and how communication would happen to the extent that they knew with senior executives between or at that level between agencies, but their comments were primarily focused on like on the ground, drafting the rule and getting feedback.
Did the original questioner have any follow-up, or did that, Emily, did that answer your question? Okay. Miriam, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so on a completely different topic from Emily's, just something to keep in mind going through. I didn't have any specific language changes or anything, but as Chris was saying, this is the type of thing that it's best to address early rather than late. Most of this is focused on the substance of your rulemaking, and the Office of the Federal Register in general has no opinion or input on the substance of your rulemaking, and will have no opinion which way you go. We will have opinions on how you draft and how you codify. And probably 70 to 75% of the time, what you are doing as an agency is standard and works for the Federal Register and the CFR, and there is absolutely no problem. And then the other 25 to 30%, especially when you're negotiating with other agencies to work things out, there are times when the negotiation results in a compromise and a certain compromise structure that then is contrary to what we can actually put into the CFR. And so the agreement gets worked out in advance. And the Office of the Federal Register is not involved until we get the live document for publication, at which point we say, ooh, there's a problem, and then things kind of blow up. So at the same time that you're thinking about interagency communication and negotiation for the substance, if there's a chance that you're going to have any kind of odd structure or need any kind of deviation or non-standard publication for whatever reason, include the Office of the Federal Register in this interagency communication, because a lot of times we can work something out at the very beginning, have it on file, and then the publication process for your documents are greatly improved, and we don't have a last minute, whoa, and now we have to work something out that then works with your compromise. So just something else to keep in mind. It's not substantive, it's structural, but sometimes the structure impacts your substance. Yeah. I have not seen an agency try and do a 7th level paragraph in a few years, but that's one example where we get a document in and it's got a 7th level paragraph that the agency said, oh, well, you didn't give us an example of what a 7th level paragraph looks like, so we just made it up. And we say, well, we didn't give you an example because you can't do one. So you can't have a 7th level, and now you have to recodify the whole thing to get the text. And that blows up the entire section sometimes, which is difficult when you've got hundreds of pages and you're trying to get the document published 3 days from now. So, things to keep in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Miriam. Anyone else have any global comments? If not, I would say we go to number 1, and it has 5 subparagraphs. If we wanted to consider an addition that kind of touched on Miriam's point, I think it would be relevant in 1C, where you would say have relevant expertise in or resources relating to the subject or structure of a draft or plan rule. I think we could add or structure there, and that would, and clearly OFR has expertise there. That would be my proposal. I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that proposed addition.
That works for us. Thank you.
Any objections, concerns? Okay, hearing none, I think we can consider that adopted by unanimous consent. Anyone else have any other thoughts on 1A through E? Hearing none, I think we can move to number 2. About the unified agenda, and being sort of helpful in like offering pre-proposal feedback. Does anyone have any comments or concerns about number 2? Hearing none, let's move to number 3. Okay, 3, this is A through D. This is about informal communications and highlighting several areas where it may be especially beneficial to an agency. Carolyn Dubé.
Hi, I just actually have a very small technical suggestion in the language on line 80, and welcome feedback on this. Officials involved in rulemaking should communicate as appropriate informally. That as appropriate, should that come after informally? So it would read, officials involved in rulemaking should communicate informally, comma, as appropriate. It just seemed that putting the as appropriate there suggested that the communication was the issue and not the informality of it. So I just suggest thinking about that and seeing what you all think.
I think it works going afterwards.
Yeah, I think my question was, is it the communication that we're worried about, if the communication is appropriate or the informality is inappropriate, if you see what I'm saying? It's, I don't know where the appropriate is trying to modify. You know, an informal communication could be inappropriate if it's sent to personal text, right? Or a communication could be inappropriate because you're not supposed to discuss something at all. So I just, a little semantic there.
Carolyn, just to jump in from the drafting perspective, I think that your edit hits more of what we were going for,
Okay.
as appropriate post informality.
Great. It looks like you might need to like leave a space there, Adam. There's like, you deleted both spaces. There you go. Anyone have concerns about that change? David?
I don't have concerns about the change. I was gonna ask about recommendation D there. I just don't know what regular unstructured meetings to discuss rules for development and share feedback. I don't know if that advances the ball, if that's the kind of recommendation that ACUS has made in the past. And so that's what I was gonna ask about. Should we hold that until this is
Let's
clear?
hold that for just 1 second. So any objections to Carolyn's proposed change? If not, I think we'll deem that adopted by unanimous consent. And then as to D, when I read this, I didn't view it as they were recommending such meetings. They were saying informal communication may be beneficial when an agency is conducting such meetings. So like the idea is some agencies regularly have just like these open meeting times with each other to discuss rules and development. And so talking about a particular rulemaking at such meetings may be beneficial to the agency. And that seemed like somewhat of an obvious point to me, but also like made a lot of sense to put in here. Chris or Adam, did you have a different view or intent there in 3D?
I'll let Chris pick that up, but just to provide a little bit of background there, I think that from the drafter's perspective, Jen, you're absolutely right. You know, we thought of sub D to be, you know, if an agency does conduct, you know, sort of interagency unstructured meetings, like think about like a brown bag style lunch where you sort of get together and talk about regulatory updates. That's where this language sort of came from. But I'll let Chris supplement my assessment.
Yeah, no, I think that's right, Adam. Yeah, so one of the things that we heard was that, you know, in some cases they thought agency personnel thought this was helpful, that they had this kind of informal get-togethers, periodic get-togethers where they would talk about broader issues related to, you know, developments, governmental developments, procedurally, et cetera, but it could be also a conduit to to talk about some of those specific rulemakings that are in development at these agencies as well. So I think that was the goal there.
Does that answer your question? Are you comfortable with that?
Yeah, I suppose so. So it's conditional on having regular unstructured meetings that this stuff would come up. And I don't know if that advances the ball a ton, but definitely don't think it's a requirement of. I guess I agree with you. It's not that you were trying to require regular unstructured meetings, which would seem like a bigger ask to me.
Carolyn?
Hi, I actually have a question that just maybe because I'm not in the same branch, but is unstructured meetings a term of art, or is that just a way of describing informal meetings, but you didn't want to use the word informal because we're talking about informal communications and we didn't want to overuse it? Because to me, what's, you know, the way it was just described, I think by Adam and Chris was, these are informal meetings, and therefore it would be beneficial to have informal communication at that time. So again, I tend to focus on the language, but is that word unstructured necessary? If we take it out, does it suggest something more formal? But I just think the unstructured meetings, I don't know that it adds anything, and it could inject some ambiguity into what this recommendation is.
I can probably provide the drafting perspective on that, Carolyn. So I think certainly injecting any ambiguity, I would definitely agree with taking out unstructured meetings. My intent with using that term was to separate this from a more formal meeting, such as like a working group where multiple agencies might be producing like a discussion memo to talk about a particular provision in a draft rule. This was really just meant to be, the most informal of get-togethers to talk about regulatory or legislative developments that occasionally happen between agencies.
Yeah, I think it would just be to distinguish between that and, what Adam was suggesting, which was, sometimes in joint rulemaking, there'll be relatively formal periodic meetings that are happening as that rule is going through development. And that's a bit different than I think what we're referencing here in D. But, I don't know if that word unstructured is necessary to keep there. I mean, it doesn't seem to me that it would necessarily be.
I mean, and perhaps, I don't know, if like instead of regular unstructured meetings, you could say something conducting regular status meetings, or something other than that. Just the idea of, and I'm just throwing that out there. This hasn't had a lot of thought, and I was listening to Jen at the beginning, and I should have given this more thought to be able to provide in advance. But that was just a word that struck out to me. Regular status meetings, or even just discussions. Regular discussions.
I don't think we want to use, I think,
yeah, you don't want to use discuss twice. So you could say conducting regular discussions regarding the status of rules and development or something like that.
Tyler, did you have a comment on this matter?
Yeah, I guess I'm just struggling with D altogether, right? It's basically saying you should have informal communication when you're having informal communication about rules. And the other three, like I get, they're about like at this phase of the process, you should consider informal communication about the rulemaking, and that totally makes sense to me. But D just seems to I'm struggling with the value add of D, I guess.
Jen, can I respond to that?
Yep.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't have strong feelings about it, but I do think it's trying to convey something a bit different that, we should, I get your point, Tyler. We should have informal communication when we have informal communication. So I do think the meeting piece of that was actually relatively valuable because there are within certain groups across agencies, these kind of, like I said, informal, regular meetings where they just discuss issues. And I think that could be one interesting avenue I think they mainly in these conversations, I mean, some of the interviewees brought this up, but they didn't really suggest that they were talking about specific rulemakings in there and more talking about general policies. But I guess, the point of this particular recommendation would just say that these meetings are a potential place where some of this communication could happen and actually open the door to broader communication and potentially, as I talked about, that agency personnel rely a lot on their networks. It could expand the set of individuals that they're communicating with respect to a particular rulemaking. So I think that's the idea. I'm not sure that the language is we have currently really conveys that, but that would be the goal. But I mean, I don't feel strongly about it one way or the other.
David, you had your hand raised.
Yes. Well, I really was going to make the same point that Tyler did, and I'm not persuaded by the response to it. And the way I was going to ask my question was, isn't what D is saying adequately covered by the introductory language under 3? That's what communicate as appropriate informally, or you've moved informally, communicate informally as appropriate. Seems to me that that adequately covers what I'm hearing about D, unless I'm still missing something.
Adam, how about we have a proposal to strike D, and then to do that, we would need to move the or and have a period at the end of C. Anyone have any objections? Any ACUS committee member have any objections to removing D? Hearing none, I'll view that as adopted by unanimous consent. Moving on to number 4. This is sort of compiling agency contacts or having periodic interagency meetings. Any concerns with number 4? All right, let's move to number 5. Daniel Amadeo.
Yeah, hi. I think the area I think that could be changed here is if we could change ordinarily to as appropriate, reconvene after the comment period. I just think that, building in and acknowledging that there's some flexibility is beneficial here.
Anyone have any response to that or concern about that? Miriam?
And this is from the perspective of an agency that doesn't really have much involvement with most of the substance of the interagency process. But way back when I did other stuff, I agree that ordinarily maybe a little bit too strong, but I would say maybe instead of as appropriate there, maybe say should plan to reconvene and then put as appropriate at the end of the sentence after discuss potential responses, because you don't know what comments you're going to get. So the comments that you get may have absolutely no impact on what the other agencies think, but they might. So if you have a plan to address those comments and then you don't need it, you're ahead of the game, as opposed to, well, we'll get the comments and then we'll see what we need to do. That's just my perspective, so that you've got a plan on the books going forward, and then you can get rid of it if you don't need it.
See, I prefer just saying as appropriate because I worry that like plan to isn't actually the same thing as saying you should do it. And as appropriate, I think is flexible enough to cover what you're talking about. Like, it's not really appropriate if the comments don't end up implicating the other agency. But I see that we've got a bunch of people raise their hands. David, I think you were first.
How about should consider reconvening? Should consider reconvening if appropriate after the comment period. Should consider reconvening if appropriate after the comment period.
Emily, did you have a different suggestion?
So I think should consider and as appropriate tend to do the same work. So including both of them seems a little redundant to me, but what I actually raised my hand for is more broadly. We have this conversation all the time in ACUS recommendations. And the thing is, they're recommendations, they're not mandatory. And so I think that as appropriate, or, don't do this if it doesn't make sense, should be basically taken as a blanket integral part of all ACUS recommendations. Like, if it doesn't make sense, don't do it. And I think we water things down when we feel the need to sort of emphasize it in some places.
I agree with what Emily said about my prior suggestion. So I change it to should consider reconvening.
Adam, you need to delete the reconvene there too. Yeah. Tyler? Tyler, did you have a comment?
Sorry, I was just gonna say that I like Daniel's over the other version, but David's works for me. So either one of those two is fine.
Yeah. I probably preferred the should reconvene as appropriate, but I'm fine with consider reconvening as well. Daniel, did you have would you still prefer as appropriate, or?
I'm fine with should consider reconvening. My issue is that it's not always ordinary to reconvene. It's all about the nature and substance of the consultation and the comments you get. So there's nothing typical. So that's why I wanted to get rid of the ordinarily there. And this is fine.
Okay. Anyone have any objections or refinement on this proposed language in 5? If not, we'll view that as adopted by unanimous consent, and we'll move on to paragraph number 6. Anyone have comments about the first sentence? I mean, there we have the consider and as appropriate language that Emily was pointing out before. But I think it's probably fine. Does anyone have any concerns? All right, what about with the second sentence in 6 or the little sub-bullets? Tyler?
For A, when it says statutory requirement, is it like one of those agencies' statutes that they are tasked with, carrying out, or am I gonna have to give particular attention to somebody's feedback on the Commodity Exchange Act and how to best interpret that, even though we're the CFTC and their treasury or labor or some other?
I think the point here is, like, when Congress has directed that an agency comment on that particular type of rulemaking,
Gotcha.
then you have to consider it.
Okay,
That's like the type of statutes that Chris was talking about in the report.
great. I'm good.
Adam, I think in little d, conflicts should probably be conflict, right? Because you have provides data or opinions relevant to the rulemaking that conflict with the drafting agency's findings. I think for agreement's sake. Hearing nothing else, I'd go to, well, I assume that's unanimous consent if that's correct agreement. And then let's move to paragraph 7.
You are correct. Take out the S.
Yeah.
Data or opinions is plural.
Yep, exactly. Any concerns about telling the agency why their feedback was not incorporated?
Structure, can we say it should consider telling their agency just because we deleted ordinarily above?
Emily?
Sorry, I kind of object to that because they either should do it, like we either think it's a good practice to do it or we think they should do it when it's appropriate. But actually, I think should consider is maybe the worst of all possible worlds, because then what we're recommending is that they consider doing something. Should they ever do it? Like, are there circumstances in which they should do it? Is just having the thought go through your mind sufficient? It just seems to me more useful if we're clear about what we think the best practice is.
Yeah, in my experience when I was in government, it was very rare that an agency actually did provide such substantive feedback or like explain why they rejected someone's comment, like they just rejected it. So I don't know if the agency representatives on here would like more feedback about why their comments aren't being accepted, but my experience at least was people almost never never did provide feedback about that. So yeah, Bill.
Well, I'm with Emily on this, and except maybe even stronger. I should take out consider and take out ordinarily. It should tell the other agency why the feedback was not incorporated. I mean, my God, if we're working together and somebody goes to the trouble of giving you substantive feedback, it's the least you can do to say, why we didn't do it. So I could settle for ordinarily, but I'd prefer not even to have that in there.
Miriam.
Yeah, I agree with Bill and Emily. This is a best practice. The best practice is you tell the agency why it's not incorporated. Do you have to? No. I mean, we have no ACUS police to come along and say, hey, you didn't follow the recommendation. It is a recommendation. The best practice is to do this. So it's the best practice. But it's not the required. I mean, it's not required. So I'm with Bill and Emily.
Chris.
Yeah, so interestingly, one of the things that we actually heard, and maybe this is selective memory, is that they quite typically do that because they want to kind of encourage that feedback and develop their network. And so, there's a strategic reason why you would tell an agency you couldn't do something or it didn't really fit in order to kind of maintain that relationship. Now, I'm not sure that could, like I said, it could be selective recollection of those circumstances, but that was certainly something that came up multiple times.
Well, maybe the agencies just didn't find my feedback valuable. It could have been a problem with me. David?
Since it says draft or proposed rule, does this include situations where the issue is about something that appeared in an NPRM? I mean, is this a comment that needs to be responded to?
Chris?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point, David. I think this is more directed, and Adam, you correct me if I'm wrong on the recommendation, but this would be more directed at this early stage engagement that we talked about prior to the proposed rule. If they do submit a comment on a proposed rule, obviously they need to respond to it. The agency needs to respond to it. my understanding, at least based on the interviews and our, in my general kind of study of the rulemaking process and comments, is that they relatively rarely submit comments. I mean, there are certain agencies that do, but for the most part, they don't. But I do think that it could be more specific, the recommendation. I'd be interested to hear Adam's take on that, though.
But shouldn't you delete the words "or proposed"?
So yeah, so maybe from the drafting perspective, I'll say that it's definitely Chris's understanding, was my understanding in drafting this, is to not provide a recommendation on, responding to like an interagency comment in NPRM. So I think that David, I take your point that proposed rule does introduce some ambiguity in there, and it might be worthwhile to pull that out.
Trying to look back at the recommendation, because I felt like we used that language. Let's see, we have draft or planned. Okay, I think that we start seeing proposed pop up after this point, so we'll look at it as it comes along. Adam, Jeremy, did you have?
Yeah, I guess from the drafting perspective as well, there's sort of an open question as to, I mean, I don't think we were thinking of a comment provided, submitted through regulations.gov that appears in the docket, but it certainly is possible that agencies might provide more informal feedback in response to a proposed rule. That there's an open question as to whether that's an ex parte communication or not. I mean, part of this project was to revisit an earlier 1980 recommendation, which basically says that policy advice is not necessarily something that needs to go into the docket in the first place. So in terms of proposed rule, this might be getting at a broader set of communications than just formal comments submitted through the notice and comment process.
Tyler?
I was actually going to ask a question about ex parte communication, because I think both agencies I've been at in the past year, like their ex parte policy, I believe, would say that pretty much any substantive agency feedback would be an ex parte communication that needs to be reflected in the comment file of a proposed rule. So I'm not sure what communications we would be talking about that fall outside of either an actual comment or an ex parte communication.
Okay. Bill?
Well, it was my understanding that, I mean, when an agency submits a proposed rule to OMB, to OIRA, right, for OIRA sign off, that it is not uncommon for OIRA to get comments from agencies, all right, with respect to that proposed rule. I mean, you could call it a draft rule, you could call it a proposed rule, but I think the agency calls it a proposed rule at that point that they've submitted to OIRA. And, assuming that OIRA passed that communication on to the agency, which is my understanding is what happens if indeed there's not an actual meeting on the subject, that I would think that situation should be covered here, right? That is, again, if the agency rejects it, then they ought to tell them why. So I understand that if it's actually they're responding to the public, in the public commenting to a proposed rule that has been published in the Federal Register, blah, 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 that there's going to be, you have to respond to the comment even if you don't respond to the agency. But I think I sort of like leaving in a proposed rule because I don't see what the harm is, all right? In other words, it may pick up situations such as I've described with OIRA that don't include the sort of public commenting stuff. So I prefer to leave it in.
But I would have thought that I think typically the agencies refer to the draft as a draft until it's actually released to the public, even if it's not like formally published in the register, like until it's like proposed on their website type thing. But
I mean, the executive order refers to it as a proposed rule submitted to OIRA.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
don't have a problem with leaving it in. Anyone have concerns with leaving it in?
Not a concern, just a follow-up on that. I know that it's not Federal Register nomenclature, but agencies do refer to a final rule document that OFR would consider a draft final rule. Agencies refer to as a proposed rule until it publishes, as distinct from the actual proposed rule or notice of proposed rulemaking that was published a year, 2, 3, 4 years ago in the Federal Register. So the term proposed rule here could in fact refer to the document that is proposed to be a rule, and the draft could refer to the draft that could be proposed to be the proposed rule.
The proposed final. Okay, that's a good subset.
So, I mean,
considered.
Agencies have all kinds of unique nomenclature, I guess is my point. So, you know, that draft or proposed rule language could encompass all the variations of all of the not yet published versions in a rulemaking.
Okay. Anyone have, with those additional sort of points of data, anyone have concerns about leaving draft or proposed rule in? If not, I think we should go back to the point we started with, which is, you know, should we say it ordinarily should tell the other agency why the feedback was not incorporated? Or should we, or just delete that and say it should tell the other agency why the feedback was not incorporated? My own personal view is probably we should can keep ordinarily in there or as appropriate or some caveat, because while I understand the point about a best practice, there may be circumstances where, you know, it shouldn't tell them why it wasn't incorporated there. And I don't know, I guess I know that it's a best practice, but I think ordinarily should encompasses the idea that it's a best practice. Daniel?
Yeah, so just, you know, I think there were a few points that were made I'm hoping to respond to here. First being that, you know, the discussion about the OIRA process and the centralized review process and how that touches upon these types of communications. OIRA has guidance out there. There's OMB memos that say that like communications that are going through the OIRA process have to run through OIRA. That there isn't supposed to be, you know, I guess sort of sidebar conversations once it's there. That's how the communication goes. And so the extent to which communication can be passed back is sort of influenced by that process. So that's part of, you know, my discomfort with ordinarily, because it's, you know, again, it's at the whims of sort of the desk officer and like how communication is being run and priorities of decision makers. I think there's also a comment just about, you know, ex parte communications. You know, I don't know if that here is a major concern. I know the Sierra Club v. Castle decision discussed how, you know, deliberative process attaches to some of these communications because it is government to government. But, you know, that said, I do want to be mindful of deliberative process when we're talking about some of these communications back and forth, particularly if there are differences of opinion between two agencies. You know, I would just offer that for consideration. I like as appropriate, but I know others here are saying that's, you know, we don't need to hedge everything. That's why I was like, let's get rid of ordinarily and put consider like before. I just, but if the idea is that we don't want to have ordinarily or as appropriate, I guess I could live with it should. You know, with the understanding that should is suggestive and not prescriptive.
So I think we have like differing opinions on this one. Because I prefer it ordinarily should. I know there were at least 2 votes for removing ordinarily. Bill?
You know, you might convince me on ordinarily if you could give me an example of a situation where they shouldn't.
It may be that there's some sort of confidential classified information that an agency possesses that, you know, would have a problem with that. And so they just aren't sharing it because there's not really a need to know as to why there's some classified situation that affects that rule and they've left it out. Or it could be that they've, you
It
know,
seemed to me that the answer there would be they'd respond by saying we couldn't do that because, and we can't give you exactly the reasons why, because it's classified. I mean, in other words, at least acknowledge that I mean, it seems to me, I can't imagine a situation where it wouldn't be appropriate to acknowledge to the other agency, either directly or through OMB, that you recognize that they made a substantive comment and you're not adopting it and you have a reason for it. I mean, I just can't imagine a situation where that wouldn't be true. And if anybody can come up with one where you simply can't respond to them, I'll go with ordinarily. But until then, I think best practice is should, realizing that only ACUS will come and slap their hand if they violate our should.
what about a timing issue? What if they're rushing out a rule and someone rushes in feedback, but they don't have time to respond to explain why they didn't accept it and they just rush the rule out?
Well, it doesn't say it. There isn't a timing factor in here. It doesn't say before they do it or something. So there's no timing issue. It's just a matter of telling them.
Look, this burdens mainly agencies. So if none of the agency representatives on here are concerned about this, then I don't have a strong dog in the fight. But I would think that, you know, having been in an agency, there were a lot of times when we just didn't have time, or there were other reasons why we didn't want to communicate back to another agency, whether it be, you know, sometimes it was because frankly the substantive comment was not smart and we didn't want to cause be like, this was just a stupid suggestion. That's seems worse than just like ignoring it. In terms of agency relations, there were times that a decision was made in a front office that we didn't want to put and explain to another, agency why that decision was made. Let's see, Tyler, I see your hand is raised.
Yeah, I mean, I think you raised some of the points that I was going to make, but resource constraints are certainly one. But I think your point about the front office is a really important one. The front office may make a decision not to embrace another agency's comment. It may not explain that to the rule drafter within the agency, who then may actually not be capable of giving the why. I mean, I guess Bill, your perspective is as long as they say, our front office made this decision and didn't tell us, but that's why, that would be a sufficient communication back to the agency with concerns.
Well, I would say that I would ask the front agency first, front office, is there a reason why we're rejecting it? And if they said, yes, but I can't tell you, right? That'd be one thing. And if they said, yes, and here's why, then I'd say, can we tell them? And I mean, first of all, I used to be in an agency too, and I understand, in a sense, resource constraints. And I also, when I was in the agency, I would not ordinarily have necessarily done what I'm saying should be done. All right. And that's precisely why I'm saying it should be in there as should be, because there'll be that little bit of a thumb on the scale say, well, yeah, you do take the extra 15 minutes, you know, to give them a call or something or other, right? And get over that inertia that you would otherwise have. So that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the agency recognition, but recognizing that essentially I was just being lazy about it.
Yeah, I mean, my inclination would be just to preserve to the agency the best decision making on how to handle interagency relations. But you know, as everyone has said, it's an ACA's recommendation. I'm not gonna, you know, it's not the hill I'm gonna die on today. There's other ones for me. So
Miriam.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's a best practice. It's not agencies, you have to do this. So if an agency says, okay, yeah, it's a best practice, but right now I just don't feel like it. Okay, so you're not doing the best practice. There's no penalty. We can't force you, but ACUS is at least saying this is the best, this is the standard that we want you to rise to. If you have other reasons why you're not rising to it, okay. But that doesn't mean that we're going to lower the standard because you've got reasons why you're not going to rise this high. So I want to take ordinarily out.
All right. It seems like there is a will of the committee to take ordinary out. David?
I vote with Bill Funk on this one. It seems to me the earlier part that we've already talked about is about facilitating communication. Well, it's not going to facilitate communication if they give you suggestions and you don't give them a respectful response. I say take the ordinarily out.
All right. As with Tyler, this is not the hill I'm going to die on today, especially since I'm not in an agency that doesn't affect me. So if there's no one else who will fight on ordinarily, I think we should view that as adopted by unanimous consent and move on to number 8. Yeah. So this is about whether to consider this stuff in the public rulemaking docket or administrative record. And so it includes, like, obviously if it's required, then it can go in there. Whether there's like, you know, a lot of different factors here about whether the disclosure would be prohibited, consented amongst the agencies. So for like purpose of interagency relationships, does anyone have any comments on 8, A through G? I'll give you guys a minute to reread it and jog your memory as to whether you have concerns. Hearing nothing, I think we could move on to number 9. Oh, Bill Funk.
I'm sorry, I'm still on 8. I thought we were just still going over reading it. I'm a little concerned because I mean it would seem to me, and I didn't see it in the weathers, whether or not the information, the communication from the other agency occurred before the notice of proposed rulemaking. All right. In other words, if it was before the notice of proposed rulemaking, that's one thing. If it's after the notice of proposed rulemaking, that's another thing. And I think, you know, those, I would certainly think would be more appropriate to include it in the record, either public or the administrative record if it occurred after the notice of proposed rulemaking. But I'm not so sure that that's true beforehand. I mean, in informal communications, prior to the notice being made public, then it's almost to me like you know, it's not just another agency doing it, it's sort of like another part of your agency commenting on it and so forth. And I don't mind all these various whethers. It just seems to me there's another whether the information came in before the notice of proposed rulemaking.
Daniel, did you have a comment on that?
Yeah, I think A addresses it because whether it's required or prohibited by law, the line of case law addressing ex parte communications and discussions about communications that are received, you know, prior to a proposal, I think would cover it. And that, you know, I think it's covered more broadly under the first one.
Can I respond to that? I mean, Daniel, unless you know something I don't know, there's no general prohibition on ex parte communications in informal rulemaking. Some specific statutes like the Clean Air Act are included, but most statutes do not have any statutory requirement or any constitutional requirement. I mean, the APA doesn't. And I mean, home box office has been, you know, it's gone the way of all flesh, as it were. And so, I mean, I take your point. Most agencies don't like ex parte communications and often have regulations relating to it. But I don't know if that's required or prohibited by law would necessarily encompass prohibiting ex parte communication. So if you'd add this where the information came in for the notice of proposed rulemaking, I'd be happy, because I just think that's something that should go into the mix.
Sure. Any disagreement for me if it's of particular importance to you. I guess the finer point I would put on it is that, you know, the reasons for disclosure is for transparency and to give you know, the public the basis and purpose of a regulatory action. And so presumably if a discussion has occurred before a notice has been published, proposing a rulemaking, and that discussion, you know, the material information that the proposing agency would rely upon, it's in their best legal interest to include that in the notice. So sort of what happens before the notice is, you know, it's all sort of deliberative, and what really matters for the public transparency is, you know, the substance of the notice and the addressing of the comments moving forward as the public and the agency engage in the rulemaking process.
Adam, if we were going to add this, I would change it to not be information, but whether the interagency communication, because that's what we're talking about here. I don't have any problems with adding it.
You might say occurred before rather than came in.
Yeah. Anyone have any concerns with it? Elena?
Sorry, I couldn't find my mute, and I also said I would talk, but I just wanted to suggest that we add was published at the end of notice of proposal, just to clarify this big point. Great.
That seems fine to me for clarity's sake. Okay. Anyone have any other comments or suggestions on paragraph 8 and its little subparagraphs, its factors? Hearing none, I think we can move to paragraph 9. about consulting their chief's legal advisor and DOJ about the risks and benefits associated with disclosure. Any concerns with that? Okay, moving on to paragraph 10, which is about explaining in the relevant rulemaking dockets the key insights drawn from those communications as they relate to the rule. That seems like totally unobjectionable. Please do share your insights with us agencies. Anyone have any concerns with paragraph 10? All right, let's move on to paragraph 11. This one has a lot of subparts again. And this is about developing internal written policies about informal communication. So this goes back to the handbooks, I think, that Chris was talking about, having only, maybe a paragraph of information about informal communications. And so this is trying to suggest things that they could put in their handbooks that would be helpful to maybe encourage that sort of interagency communication. Take a minute and reread it, and then we can discuss if anyone has thoughts on additions or changes. Anyone have any thoughts?
Do we need as many occurrences of the word should as we have in the introductory material?
Sorry, I could barely hear you, David. You were asking whether we need as many occurrences.
Do we need as many occurrences of the word should as appear in the introduction of 11, before 11A? What about removing the one on line 138?
Seems like we could delete that one.
You could say how to communicate instead of how they should communicate.
Amy?
Do we want to recommend that they maintain and update the written policy as well?
That generally seems like a good idea. Maybe that, I don't know, Adam, maybe that goes in 12.
Yeah, I was gonna ask to maybe clarify, we could add that to 12 if that makes sense. So maybe we could say, here, agency should consider making publicly available.
I think you can put it in 11 and just say the agency should develop and keep up to date.
Yeah. I think that's it. That's an elegant solution, Bill, but you're also on mute. I can't hear you there.
Amy likes that. Bill's smiling, so I think that works. Anyone have any concerns with suggesting agencies keep their policies up to date? or deleting that should in preference for to communicate. I see Miriam is happy with that. We'll deem that unanimous consent. Any other thoughts on this paragraph 11? Carolyn's happy. All right, moving on to paragraph 12. Should consider making these policies publicly available. Any concerns with that? That's consistent with ACUS's push for transparency on sort of these kind of internal procedures. My daughter says, boring. Hearing no objections, I think we can. Oh, Tyler.
Sorry, I guess just as a more general question, when I have these internal policies and I've published them on my website and then I deviate from them in the course of a rulemaking, someone's going to say that I've like created a new policy in deviating from my written policy, and challenge that as some kind of problematic final agency action. Maybe the answer to that is 11. We put some kind of like, one of the things they consider is whether and how to justify deviations from the policy as like I don't know. I worry that if we don't give agencies an out from a clear way of getting out of following this every single time, and it's public, the first time they deviate, they're gonna get hit over the head about it.
Yeah, that's when really excellent agency general counsels like yourself include wiggle room in your policies, so that it's clear from the public facing document that it's not a binding policy. It's just like, this is our ordinary practice. Bill, did you have a comment?
Well, my comment was the reason in 12, we were talking about 12, and it said should consider, all right? And as you know, before I want to take out consider. Here I want to leave it in, all right? Precisely because I'm actually one who would say, maybe I don't want to make these things public because I don't want to be tied down to them. These are best practices, all right? They're management practices. They're not rules, all right? These internal policies are not rules. They're just good practices we should know about. And obviously they've written into them the concept of distinctions. So I don't think you need the new D. If you don't take it out yet, but I don't think you need it if an agency says, I don't want to make it public, all right? There's no good. Why should they know what we do internally in regard? And if you made it public, you might at that point you might say these are general practices, right? They are not intended to be rules that bind agency personnel. And so that you deal with it, if anywhere, I would think in 12, right? You say in deciding whether to make something public, might consider how to address possible deviations. That's what I would say.
Although presumably somebody, like if you don't make it public, somebody can just FOIA and get it anyway. So like ACUS has now told everyone they should have this policy. ACUS said, well, some people will publish it, some people won't. But if you don't publish it, I can just FOIA you for it. And if enough people FOIA you for it, it becomes a publicly available document. Bill, you're muted, sorry.
What about replacing the word policies in both places, 11 and 12, with something like statements of practice?
Practice, not facts, Adam.
Or practices rather than policies.
That's my point.
Yeah, so, and then you do that in 11 too. keep up to date internal written practices.
I would also change the header that's developing policies. But I like that.
And then also in the sentence on line 139, in developing such practices. Emily?
I think a lot of old ACUS recommendations speak about this kind of thing as policies. And I guess I'm a little mystified by the concern about the word policy. I mean, it's not substantive policy. It's not stuff that's, in a space where the APA makes it mandatory. These are just ways of doing business. I mean, I just think policy is the word we use for that. And especially in these circumstances where this is really about interagency communication and the people most affected are going to be other agencies, I just view the likelihood of any litigation or like campaign to FOIA these policies. It just strikes me as really remote. And I mean, I don't think we should be afraid to write down how the government operates in circumstances where there are good ways of doing business that are best disseminated in writing and that are unlikely to be the foundation for litigation.
Anyone have reactions to Emily?
I would generally I agree with Emily, but I do say that when part of the policy is to decide when to disclose interagency communications, which is currently D, used to be C, I guess, or EZ, or used to be D. The outside parties may really want to know about that, may want to be involved in that and challenge that, so that they might like to know when you've heard from other people. Yeah, Emily?
I mean, they might want to know, but my understanding was that this has always been basically treated as internal deliberations. I mean, the reason I wanted ACUS to do a project on interagency commenting when I was on the staff. And I came to the conclusion that this is sort of a pointless thing to try to study because it's a black box that's protected by law. Like, we treat the executive branch as one monolith. And like, you can want it I mean, I've wanted it for a long time, but like, give it up, man. Like, you're not going to get it. So I don't have it. Like, I don't think that, I mean, maybe I'm just wrong. But if so, I'm not the only one who's been laboring under that misimpression. And I don't think having internal policies on this is going to alter that legal landscape.
Carolyn?
Sure, and I am new to the ACUS process, and I'm in the judicial branch, so I don't deal with all of the issues that you all deal with in the executive side. But just looking at this paragraph in general, I can see the hesitation with policy because that could be a loaded word. But what this looks like, and correct me if I'm wrong, what you all are trying to get to are just standard operating procedures. And I just had a question if that's what, in fact, this was aimed at, and if that's what it's aimed at in plain language, could we just call it that? But I throw that question out for those who are more experienced with this.
I can provide maybe a bit of background on that, Carolyn. Yes, so I do think that from the drafting perspective, our intent was standard operating procedures, but as others have brought up, it is regular ACUS drafting practice to use policies in this context.
Tyler?
Another word that I would throw out is guidance. If people don't like practices and some people don't like policies.
Bill?
I'm at this point, in order to sort of bring closure to, I hope, to this, which is originally I had some question about whether to add this new D, whether and how to consider deviations from such policies. I recede from that and say, let's keep that in, keep the word policies, you know, and have this part of the considerations. And so in as much as this new D would take care of the issue of whether it's policies or practice or standard operating procedures, I say go with the ACUS methodology, call it policies, leave in the new D, and let's move on to the next, to number 12.
I wonder if it should say whether and when to deviate from such policies, or whether deviations from such policies would be appropriate or something. Let's see, should consider whether and when deviations from such policies might be appropriate. Bill is nodding his head. Anyone have concerns with that language? Okay. Anyone object to this proposal on the screen of sticking with policies but including the new D and leaving it to the very wise general counsels as to whether they include some cabining language in their policies and decide not to publish it? Hearing none, I think we can view that as unanimous consent. We were on 12 before we sort of circled back to 11. So are there any other comments on paragraph 12? If not, I have run possibly the most efficient committee meeting I have ever attended. I will view it as my sidekick's effect on all of you. You're just so charmed by the newborn that we had to finish this quickly. Adam, do we have this? Do we hold the second meeting versus voting now after one meeting? Like, are we required to have two committee meetings, or do we vote?
So I would just say that we haven't yet spoken
Oh, we
about
haven't
the
done the
preamble.
preamble. You're right. Okay,
But
so let's go
we've been so good, you know, we might
been
as
so
well roll the
good.
dice on it. You know?
I forgot about the preamble. Okay, back up to the preamble. Do people, I guess, yeah, I'm fine to continue. If people need to take a comfort break, let me know. But otherwise, let's go to the preamble and keep marching on. Okay, first paragraph. Let's see. Any objections or concerns about the first paragraph? Hearing none, let's move to paragraph 2. At least the portion on page 1. Any concerns about paragraph 2, the portion on page 1? Okay. If not, let's scroll down to the carryover. Any concerns about the carryover portion of paragraph 2? Chris?
Yeah, I just had a quick comment. Can we scroll up to the previous line there, Adam, real quick? The line 11 where it says initial resolution of conflicts between agencies, I'm not certain that that's always the case. Resolution may be fine, but initial seems like the initial resolution may come before the OIRA process.
That seems like a fair point. All right, scrolling back down to hearing no objections to that, we'll view that as unanimous consent. And we'll move to paragraph 3. Any comments or changes to paragraph 3? Haley?
So this doesn't necessarily fit in paragraph 3, but it's something that does seem to be a gap in this overall, I guess, presentation, is that one of the ways that agencies communicate during the review process is through the formal interagency circulation process. And I'm not explicitly seeing that here. One thing that struck me in looking this over is that a novel issue that's emerged during the current partial lapse is that during the formal interagency circulation process, there aren't accommodations being made for agencies with furloughed subject matter experts and things like that, where every agency would have the opportunity to participate fully in that process, and thinking about that as well as a recommendation.
Do you have, I guess there's no suggested language. Adam or Chris, do you think there's like a place that there should be any mention of that, or?
Right, yeah. So I guess maybe to provide some context, I think part of the rationale for this project, at least one of the main goals, was to treat formal 12866 like pre-clearance review separately from these recommendations, and to leave it to OIRA and OMB to come up with guidance and recommendations for that formal process. So I can imagine, like, if the committee would like for some additional clarity that this is separate from considering the formal process, maybe towards the end of the preamble, we could include, something that says, like, this should be understood to be separate from recommendations concerning the formal OIRA review under 12866.
Also, the couple of lines before that, I think that was one of the things I was reacting to. So I don't know if it explicitly talks about OIRA process, but if you go to the previous page, the beginning of that paragraph. So is this what we're talking about in, I assume that's what we're talking about in lines 9 and 10, for example.
Yep. Let's keep this in mind, and as we go through the preamble, see if there's a good point to note that this recommendation focuses on the pre-EO 12866 type communication, or like the, I guess, outside of EO 12866 communications. Bill? You're on mute.
I think it's the last paragraph in the preamble. It is a particular place to put it. We'll get when we get there, because it talks about what we're sort of proposing.
Okay, great.
And what we're not proposing.
Okay, so then let's see, let's go to paragraph 4, the paragraph beginning, what form these communications take. Any concerns about this paragraph or comments, edits? Okay, let's move to the paragraph beginning agencies use. Adam, you want to scroll down to the rest of that paragraph? Any concerns about that paragraph or comments, edits? Chris?
Yeah, so the just the comment on line 35, although less common, agencies also periodically submit comments. I would caveat that as occasionally. I think it's rare.
That seems right to me. Anyone have concerns with that change?
Seems to me to be
Scroll down to footnote
duplicative.
Sorry, David, go
It
ahead.
seems to me to be duplicative of, where is it? I lost, what line are we on now? Oh, okay.
35.
Duplicative of although less common. You're gonna put it in occasionally. We also need less common.
Yeah, that seems right. You don't need it. Agencies also occasionally submit comments in response to rules proposed by other agencies. Any concerns with that edit?
No, but can we scroll to see the footnotes, please?
Elena Ness, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, I just would like to see the footnotes.
I think she's saying, Adam, could you scroll back up, maybe?
No, down to the bottom to see the footnotes 10 and 11.
Oh, see the footnotes.
Yes, thank you. Okay, thanks.
Okay. We'll view that changes adopted by unanimous consent and move to the paragraph beginning when an agency communicates.
Footnote 10. Is this project the project for the old recommendation, or is this a current project?
Sorry, David, is there any way you could lean in?
Yeah, sure. In footnote 10, where it says another project, is that referring to the project that produced the earlier recommendation, or is this a current project? What is this other project?
Right, let's see here. Yeah, so there is a current project on interagency agreements, like memoranda of understanding and agreement. So that's what this is referencing.
Well,
Jeremy put a link in the chat.
All right, but if that's something that's ongoing now, it seems to me it's premature to refer to it here, because what we're working on is a draft of something to be adopted in June and live on afterwards.
Jeremy, is that other project likely to be on the plenary schedule for June too, where this could end
Yes.
up like
Yeah,
reference?
another committee is considering it right now. I mean, so one possibility is that the Committee on Style can just sub in a citation to it once they're both adopted.
Yeah,
That seems like a good solution to me. I don't know. What do you think, David?
yeah. Just looking for a way to indicate that this language is simply a placeholder.
Adam, can we put some note in like this language is a placeholder, assuming that things can like to be addressed after the plenary kind of thing by the Committee on Style?
All right, I have this language as a placeholder. What else are we thinking?
I don't know, maybe highlight that just so it doesn't accidentally end up in
Yeah.
in the plenary.
Yeah, no worries. We'll send that back to the
Yeah.
Committee on Style.
Put it in brackets with a word like note.
Yeah.
Colon.
Okay. Did anyone have any edits to the paragraph when an agency communicates? Hearing none, let's move to the next paragraph in recommendation 80-6. This is just summarizing ACUS's previous recommendation. Anyone have any concerns? Okay, you want to scroll down and show that footnote 15? Just the site. Okay. Then we come to the last paragraph of the preamble. I would probably propose changing rule writers to like agency personnel in the last sentence there. Because there's more people involved in the process. And then this is the place that Bill suggested we could say something about like how this is outside of this recommendation focuses on sort of informal communications outside of the EO 12866 process.
I wonder if you could just put it in a footnote at the end of the
Yeah.
end of the paragraph.
Yeah, that's probably the best place for it. Amy?
I guess I'm a little concerned that having the footnote here at the end of the preamble, you have to read all the way through it and then get to a footnote to realize that what the focus of this recommendation is on pre 12866 review. So maybe if it's going to be a footnote, I would recommend putting it up top so that people are immediately aware that this is outside of the 12866 process.
All right, just so I'm following there, where I guess maybe where should we locate that that footnote if we move it up higher?
Maybe put it in footnote 4 where you're citing to EO 12866.
All right, how's that look?
Looks good to me. Thank you.
Emily?
I would just take out the word formal. I would just say OIRA interagency review process.
Okay. Anyone have any objections to that? Concerns about that addition to the footnote? Okay, hearing none, I'll deem that accepted by unanimous consent, and then we can go back to that final paragraph, see if anyone had any other additional edits to that paragraph.
Yes, I do. In the second to the last line of it, change how they should communicate to how to communicate, which is the way we said it many pages afterwards.
Good note. View that as accepted by unanimous consent. Any other edits to that paragraph?
The line numbers have all changed, but 1, 3, 4.
Can you scroll up a little bit, Adam?
Where the word proactively appears, it's about 6 or 7 lines from the end.
Line 62.
Yeah, I'd move proactively to go before the word seek. Should proactively seek.
Okay, that seems fine to me. Any other suggestions on that paragraph? Hearing none, I think we can view that as any edits in that paragraph that I haven't already mentioned as accepted by unanimous consent. So now we go back to the question that I had asked before, Adam, which is, do we have to host a second committee meeting, or are we able to vote after one committee meeting?
I don't think I'm overstepping too much in saying I think that's totally fine, Jen.
Okay, well, then I recommend that we vote to adopt this rule, to propose it to the plenary. Jeremy or Adam, do we have to do a hands raised or voice vote, or can we do it by unanimous consent?
Might pass that one to Jeremy.
I don't think there's any formal requirement. You can do a raise of hands.
Okay, let's raise any committee members who have voting privileges. Let's go ahead and raise our hands if we want to recommend this to the plenary. It's in the reactions button. Give them time to the votes. Okay. Now we're going to lower our hands, and anyone who is opposed to this recommendation, please raise your hand now. Adam, Chris, you did such an excellent job on this. Huge congratulations to you both. Like I said, this is the smoothest one I've ever been involved with. So thank you to all the committee members for your thoughtful contributions. And I will look forward to not seeing you at our next meeting, which was going to be April 14th. But instead, I hope you have a good day that the Titanic sank. That is the April 14th. My son is reading a book on the Titanic, so that is the day the Titanic sank. You can read something about the Titanic instead of participate on a committee meeting on that. So
Well, I hope the recommendation doesn't sink, but it's possible as a long time, as having long time personal involvement with ACUS. This may be the first time ever that this happened in one meeting.
no. Thank you all. And we'll be talking to you again at a future committee meeting or the plenary. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.